What if I told you that everything you believed about the power of the Egyptian armies is not entirely true? We are used to thinking about pyramids and pharaohs, but we forget what really sustained their millennial rule. It was not magic or the will of the gods, but cold calculation, technology, and weapons that were perfect for their time. Egypt's power was forged not in temples, but in armories on the banks of the Nile. Every warrior, from a simple foot soldier to an elite charioteer, was part of a well-oiled machine. And every element of that machine had its own deadly tool. We will examine the top 7 weapons that made the Egyptians the masters of the ancient world. We will talk not only about spears and bows, but also about the materials, technologies, and tactics of their use. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how a simple combination of wood and bronze could decide the fate of entire empires. What if I told you that the most fearsome weapon of ancient Egypt had no blade? Long before the advent of swords and axes, the mace was the main argument in any dispute. This simple but incredibly effective weapon symbolized the very power of the pharaoh. It was with a mace that Pharaoh Narmer, the unifier of Egypt, symbolically struck down his enemies in the famous Palette of Narmer. It was not just a weapon, but a scepter, a sign of the right to judge and punish. Possession of the mace meant possession of all power. The design of the mace was ingenious in its simplicity. It consisted of a wooden handle and a stone head. The stone, usually diorite or limestone, was carefully shaped into a sphere or pear shape. A hole was drilled in the stone with great difficulty, after which the handle was inserted into it. For greater strength, the connection could be secured with leather straps. The simplicity of manufacture allowed this weapon to be produced in large quantities. In the early period of Egyptian history, when armor was rare, the blow of such a mace was devastating. It easily broke through wooden shields and delivered heavy crushing blows. Light infantry simply had no chance against such a weapon. However, with the advent of metal helmets and more durable armor, the effectiveness of the mace began to decline. The stone head could split when struck against metal. Gradually, it began to give way to more sophisticated types of weapons. Despite this, the mace never completely disappeared from the battlefield. It remained a weapon of auxiliary troops and militias. Its cheapness and simplicity made it accessible to the poorest segments of the population. Moreover, the mace retained its symbolic status forever. Pharaohs and nobles continued to be depicted with it even when bronze swords were used in actual combat. It became an eternal symbol of order, triumphing over chaos. Thus, the history of the mace is a story of how brute physical force became a symbol of state power. This weapon did not just inflict damage, it enforced the law, and therein lay its main strength. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think was more important in ancient weapons? Their actual effectiveness or their symbolic meaning? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most widespread weapon in the Egyptian army? If the mace was a symbol of power, then the spear was its backbone. Spearmen formed the core of the Egyptian infantry for thousands of years. The spear's design was simple and functional, refined over centuries of use. A long wooden shaft, usually made of sturdy acacia wood, was topped with a spearhead. This simplicity made it possible to arm huge armies without unnecessary expense. In early periods, spearheads were made of burnt wood or sharp flint. With the development of metallurgy, they began to be cast from copper and then from more durable bronze. The bronze spearhead, shaped like a leaf, was capable of piercing leather armor. The standard length of an Egyptian spear was about 1.5 to 2 meters. This allowed the warrior to keep the enemy at a distance. At the same time, it was not too long to be effective in close formation. The Egyptian infantry used spears in dense formations reminiscent of the Greek phalanx. The warriors closed their large shields, putting forward a forest of sharp tips. It was almost impossible to overcome such a wall of spears and shields. The spear was a versatile weapon. It could be used both for stabbing and for throwing at short distances. Training in the use of the spear was the basis of the training of any Egyptian recruit. Even elite chariot warriors had several short javelins in their arsenal. They used them to defeat enemy infantry before deploying the charioteer's main weapon, the bow. This proves the versatility of this weapon. Its simplicity, low cost, and effectiveness made the spear a truly popular weapon. Without countless troops of spearmen, Neither the great conquests of the pharaohs of the New Kingdom nor the defense of the borders from nomadic raids would have been possible. It was the main instrument of the Egyptian military machine. The spear did not require special skills or physical strength, unlike the bow or sword. It was a weapon of discipline and order. The strength of the spearman lay in the strength of his comrades standing shoulder to shoulder. But what if a simple spear was not enough to pierce the enemy's armor? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of a weapon that was created specifically for this purpose. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Egyptian armorers. When Egypt's enemies, such as the Hyksos, brought new technologies with them, including more advanced armor, spears ceased to be effective. The Egyptians urgently needed a response, and that response was the battle axe. Early Egyptian axes resembled work tools. A copper or bronze blade was simply inserted into a slot in a wooden handle and secured with leather straps. This design was unreliable and often broke in battle. A real revolution in axe design occurred during the Middle Kingdom period. Egyptian craftsmen developed a new method of attachment. Now the blade had special holes through which the handle was inserted, which significantly increased its strength. However, the real breakthrough was related to a change in the shape of the blade itself. Instead of a simple chopping axe, the so-called penetrating, or eye axe appeared. Its blade was long, narrow, and pointed. This shape was not chosen by chance. The narrow blade did not chop, but concentrated all the force of the blow in one point. This allowed it to effectively pierce the bronze helmets and armor of the time. Later, an even more sophisticated form appeared, known as the epsilon axe. Its blade had several holes which not only made it lighter, but also allowed it to be more securely attached to the handle. This was the pinnacle of Egyptian engineering. The axe became the weapon of elite infantry units. It was used to arm warriors whose task was to break through enemy lines. The blow of such an axe could not only pierce armor, but also split a shield. Unlike a spear, an axe was a melee weapon. It required great physical strength and courage from the warrior. Axe-wielding fighters were in the front lines, taking the brunt of the attack. In many reliefs of the New Kingdom, we see pharaohs striking enemies with such an axe. This shows that the axe became not only an effective weapon, but also a symbol of the offensive power of the Egyptian army. It was the key that opened any defense. The history of the Egyptian axe is the history of the arms race in the ancient world. It shows how Egyptian armorers were able not only to copy, but also to improve on foreign technologies, creating weapons that helped them drive out invaders and build a new empire. Guess how long it took to create the perfect Egyptian bow? Throughout its history, Egypt was a powerhouse of archers. It was the archers who provided fire support to the infantry and were the main striking force of the chariot troops. In the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians used a simple bow known as a self-bow. It was made from a single piece of wood, usually acacia. Such a bow was easy to make, but it was not very powerful. The arrows for such a bow were also simple. They consisted of a wooden shaft, a flint or bone tip, and feathers to stabilize flight. The range of a simple bow rarely exceeded 150 meters. A real revolution in military affairs occurred with the advent of the composite bow. The Egyptians most likely borrowed this technology from their Asian neighbors. The composite bow was much more powerful and had a longer range than the simple bow. Making such a bow was a complex and lengthy process. It was glued together from several layers of different materials: wood, horn, and animal tendons. Each material worked in its own way, giving the bow elasticity and strength. The horn glued to the inside of the bow worked well under compression. The tendons glued to the outside worked perfectly under tension. This combination made the bow incredibly powerful for its size. Arrows for composite bows also became more sophisticated. Bronze arrowheads of various shapes appeared, leaf-shaped for hitting unprotected targets, and narrow faceted ones for piercing armor. It was a high-tech weapon of its time. It was composite bows that armed elite archers on chariots. They could shower the enemy with a hail of arrows from a safe distance, disrupting their formation and sowing panic. The chariot was, in essence, a mobile platform for delivering the archer's fire. The art of archery was highly valued in Egyptian society. The best archers were selected for the pharaoh's guard. The ability to shoot accurately was considered a sign of aristocracy. But how did a warrior defend himself against a whole hail of such arrows? In the next chapter, you will learn about the main means of defense of the Egyptian infantry. The main means of defense for an Egyptian warrior was a large shield. It was as important a piece of equipment as a spear or an axe. Without a shield, an infantryman would be defenseless against the enemy's arrows and javelins. The Egyptian shield had a distinctive shape, a large rectangle with a rounded top. Its dimensions were such that it covered the warrior from chin to knees. This provided maximum protection. The base of the shield was a wooden frame. It was made of light but durable wood. The frame was covered with several layers of coarse ox hide. The hide made the shield durable, but also sufficiently elastic. An arrow with a bronze tip could pierce the first layer, but would get stuck in the subsequent layers, causing no harm to the warrior. It was a simple but effective composite armor. In the center of the shield on the inside, there was a wooden handle. The warrior held the shield with his left hand, leaving his right hand free for weapons. The shield was quite heavy, which required infantrymen to be in good physical shape. The surface of the shield was often painted. It could depict the emblem of a military unit or religious symbols for protection. For the enemy, a wall of painted shields was also a means of psychological pressure. In battle, the Egyptian infantry used the wall of shields tactic. The soldiers in the front row closed their shields together, creating a solid cover. The soldiers in the back rows could shoot arrows or throw javelins from behind this living wall. To protect themselves from arrows flying in a curved trajectory, soldiers could raise their shields above their heads. This formation, known to the Romans as the tortoise, allowed the infantry to close in on the enemy with minimal losses. It required the highest level of discipline and coordination. The shield was not only a means of protection, but also a weapon. Its edge could be used to strike in close combat. A massive shield could also be used to push the enemy away and disrupt their balance. Thus, the Egyptian shield was a multifunctional piece of equipment. It provided protection, served as the basis for tactical formations, and was an auxiliary weapon. Without it, the infantry of ancient Egypt would have been unthinkable. What if I showed you a weapon that was a sword, an axe, and a hook all at once? The Egyptian warrior's arsenal included a special weapon that became one of the symbols of the New Kingdom. We are talking about the khopesh, or sickle sword. The shape of the khopesh is unique and has no analogs in other cultures. It has a curved blade sharpened on the outside, like a sickle. It is believed that its progenitor was a Sumerian agricultural tool. However, unlike a sickle, the khopesh was made of bronze rather than stone. It was an expensive and prestigious weapon, available only to elite warriors and the pharaoh himself. Finding a khopesh in a tomb was a sign of high status. The design of the khopesh made it a versatile weapon. The straight part of the blade near the handle could be used for stabbing blows, like a regular sword. This allowed it to be used in close formation. The main advantage was provided by the curved, crescent-shaped part. Thanks to it, the khopesh had an offset center of gravity, which turned it into a kind of axe. A slashing blow with such a weapon was terrifying in its power. In addition, the curved shape allowed the khopesh to be used as a combat hook. It could be used to hook and pull aside an enemy's shield or weapon. This opened the enemy up to attack by another warrior. The khopesh was not a weapon for fencing. The technique of fighting with it was based on powerful, sweeping blows. This required physical strength rather than agility from the warrior. The production of the khopesh was a complex process. It was cast from bronze in special molds and then forged for a long time to give it strength. Only the most skilled armorers could make such a weapon. Many temple reliefs depict pharaohs such as Ramses II holding a khopesh. This emphasized their role as supreme warriors and defenders of Egypt. The khopesh was the weapon of victors. All these weapons were effective in the hands of a foot soldier, but how did the Egyptians achieve dominance on the battlefield? In the next chapter, we will talk about the main striking force of their army. The Egyptian chariot was not just a means of transportation, but a real weapon system. It revolutionized warfare in the ancient East. It was the advent of chariots that marked the beginning of the era of great empires. The Egyptian war chariot was the pinnacle of technology at the time. It was designed to be as light and fast as possible. The frame was made of bent wood and covered with leather to reduce weight. The chariot crew consisted of two people. The first, the driver, controlled two horses and covered his partner with a shield. The second, the warrior, was the main striking force and fired from a powerful composite bow. The main task of the chariots was to avoid direct contact with the enemy. Their tactic was to maneuver quickly and fire at the enemy from a distance. They circled around the enemy infantry, showering them with arrows and causing confusion in their ranks. Charioteers were the military elite of Egyptian society. Only the noble and wealthy could afford to maintain chariots, horses, and expensive weapons. They formed a special class of warriors close to the pharaoh. Chariot warriors wore the best armor, often scale armor made of bronze plates. They were armed with the most powerful composite bows, hoplites, and a set of javelins. They were the ancient equivalent of tanks. In large battles, such as the Battle of Kadesh, thousands of chariots from both sides took part. They began the battle by trying to disrupt the enemy's ranks and prepare an attack by their infantry. Controlling such a large number of chariots required great skill on the part of the commanders. In addition to firing arrows, chariots could perform other tasks. They were used for reconnaissance, pursuing defeated enemies, and quickly transporting commanders across the battlefield. Their mobility gave the Egyptian army a huge advantage. Chariots were not only a military force, but also a symbol of the pharaoh's status. The ruler's triumphal rides in a gilded chariot were intended to demonstrate the power and wealth of Egypt. It was also a weapon of propaganda. Thus, the chariot was the heart of the new kingdom's army. It combined speed, firepower, and protection. It was precisely Egypt's dominance in chariot warfare that allowed it to create its vast empire. The effectiveness of Egyptian weapons depended directly on the materials and technologies used to make them. Egyptian armorers achieved incredible heights in their craft. Their workshops were strategically important facilities. The main material for making pole weapons, bows, and shields was wood. The Egyptians used strong local species, such as acacia and sycamore. For more expensive items, such as composite bows, imported wood could be used. Stone, especially flint, remained an important material for arrowheads and spearheads for a long time. Egyptian craftsmen mastered the technique of flaking, which allowed them to create very sharp and durable blades. Even after the advent of metals, flint continued to be used for inexpensive weapons. The first metal mastered by the Egyptians was copper. It was used to make arrowheads, axe blades, and daggers. However, copper is a fairly soft metal, and weapons made from it quickly became blunt and bent. The real breakthrough came with the discovery of bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin, which is much harder and stronger than pure copper. The advent of bronze weapons gave the Egyptian army a decisive advantage. Tin, which is necessary for the production of bronze, was not mined in Egypt. It had to be imported from distant countries, which made bronze a very expensive material. Control over the trade routes along which tin was transported was one of the main tasks of Egyptian foreign policy. The process of making bronze weapons was complex. First, the metal was melted in clay crucibles and then poured into stone or clay molds. After cooling, the blank was hammered for a long time to give it strength and shape. Sharpening and polishing were done by separate craftsmen. Weapons for the nobility and the pharaoh could be decorated with engravings, gold inlays, and precious stones. Such items were true works of art. Leather also played an important role in weaponry. It was used to make shields, quivers for arrows, elements of armor, and straps for fastening. The ability to tan leather properly was highly valued. Thus, behind every Egyptian warrior stood an entire industry. Miners, metallurgists, blacksmiths, carpenters, and tanners were all part of the vast military machine that ensured the power of the pharaohs. The Egyptian army was clearly divided into two main types of troops, infantry and chariots. These two types of warriors differed greatly from each other in terms of social status, equipment, and tactics. In essence, they were two different armies within one. The infantry formed the backbone of the army. It was recruited from the common people of Egypt, as well as from mercenaries. The infantryman was expendable, the foundation of the state's military power. The infantryman's equipment was simple and functional. A simple loincloth, a large shield, and a spear were the basic set. More experienced warriors or warriors from elite units could have an axe or a short sword. Infantry training focused on practicing actions in formation. The main quality of an infantryman was not personal valor, but discipline and the ability to maintain formation under a hail of arrows. They were the wall on which all tactics relied. Charioteers, on the other hand, were the aristocracy of the army. They were noble Egyptians who could afford expensive equipment. Service in the chariot forces was a path to glory and wealth. The charioteers' equipment was the best that Egyptian technology had to offer. An expensive composite bow, scaly bronze armor, a hoplite, and the chariot itself with horses. All this cost a fortune. Charioteer training was individual and very long. He had to be proficient with a bow while driving a chariot at full speed. This required many years of training. On the battlefield, the tasks of the infantry and chariots were different. The chariots operated on the flanks, wearing down the enemy with fire and trying to get behind them. Their goal was to disrupt the enemy's formation and organization. When the enemy was sufficiently weakened and disorganized by the attacks of the chariots, the infantry came into play. An indestructible wall of shields moved slowly but surely forward, sweeping away everything in its path. The infantry completed the rout and secured the victory. Thus, the Egyptian army was successful thanks to the competent interaction of these two different forces. The mobility and firepower of the chariots were combined with the steadfastness and discipline of the infantry. It was a perfect balance that brought victory. Having good weapons is only half the battle. The other half is knowing how to use them properly. Egyptian commanders developed effective tactics that allowed them to maximize the strengths of their army. The battle usually began with light infantry and archers. They advanced and began firing at enemy positions. Their task was to provoke the enemy into attacking and inflict the first casualties. Then the main force, the chariots, came into play. Divided into several detachments, they attacked the flanks of the enemy army. Moving at high speed, they showered the enemy with arrows, trying to avoid close combat. The main goal of the chariots was not to destroy the enemy, but to disorganize them. The hail of arrows, the dust from the wheels, the cries of the warriors, all this exerted enormous psychological pressure. The enemy formation became confused and lost control. At this moment, the Pharaoh, who was usually at the center of his army, gave the order for a general attack. The main forces of heavy infantry moved forward. This was the decisive moment of the battle. Under the cover of their archers and chariots, the heavy infantrymen with spears and shields closed in on the enemy. Their task was to engage in close combat with the already disordered enemy ranks. A wall of shields provided them with reliable protection. In the front ranks of the infantry were warriors armed with axes and hoplites. Their goal was to break through the enemy's formation. They were followed by dense ranks of spearmen who built on their success. If the infantry attack was successful and the enemy began to retreat, they were pursued by chariots. They prevented the enemy from regrouping and inflicted heavy losses on them during their flight. This completed the rout. Such tactics required precise coordination between all branches of the army. Commanders used signal flags and messengers to convey orders. The success of the battle depended on the coordination of the entire military machine. Of course, this scheme could change depending on the terrain and the tactics of the enemy. However, the general principles remained unchanged. It was this well-oiled system that brought Egypt the glory of an invincible military power. We can see that the power of the Egyptian army did not lie in any one miracle weapon. Its strength was in a balanced system where each element played an important role. From a simple spear to an elite chariot, everything worked towards the overall victory. The Egyptians created a professional army with a clear hierarchy, developed logistics, and effective tactics. They were able to combine the discipline of mass infantry with the mobility and firepower of aristocratic chariot troops. It was this synthesis that allowed them to dominate the Middle East for centuries. Their legacy is not only the majestic pyramids, but also lessons in military organization that are still relevant today. The history of ancient Egyptian weapons is a story of how technology, tactics, and discipline became the foundation of a great civilization. Which of these ancient Egyptian weapons do you think was the most effective for its time? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories.